Welcome to the Catholic Community Scripture Study, brought to you by St. John the Evangelist in Jackson, Michigan. I will be your host, Todd Gale, as we walk our way through the epic biblical stories of 1st and 2nd Samuel.
As we left off chapter 18. Saul is devolving into insanity, into rage and jealousy, and fits with demons. David was acting as a music man and an exorcist, and he slew the giant Goliath, right? Everything David is touching seems to be golden. Every time he makes a move, when Saul tries to put something in his way, David moves, and it goes to David's benefit. The people like him more and more. So what is Saul feeling? Jealous, envy. They're liking Saul less and less, right? David marries King Saul's daughter. We're going to call her Michal, just to make it easier to say. So Michal is who David marries. That is Jonathan's sister, right? So David is best friends with Jonathan, Saul's son. And Saul seems to think that Jonathan and Michal are going to turn on David, but they're not doing that. They really love David, and they're turning on their father, on Saul. So, as we end with chapter 18, King Saul kept sending David out to battle the Philistines, probably hoping that he'll die, right? The end of chapter 18 says, as often as the Philistines came out to battle, David had more success, right? He just kept winning. So his name was greatly esteemed. So that's kind of where we left off in chapter 18. A couple really quick little things to just get us up to speed and to remember a couple things. First of all, Israel, remember, is not one unified sovereign nation. Israel has a lot of tribalism at this point. It's kind of a political mess. If you remember that. The 12 tribes are not in harmony. And there's about three major groups. There's the northern group, the southern group, and then Benjamin's kind of in the middle. Who is from Benjamin? Saul. But King David is from Judah in the south, which is a little town of Bethlehem, right? So there's a lot of political intrigue going on. Along with that, throughout all of this, the second point I want you to remember is the Philistines are constantly attacking. And Denise asked a couple weeks ago, like what's that about? Why are they attacking? The Philistines are not looking for territory. They're not looking to take over Israel. Like later on, Babylon is going to come in and take over. The Philistines don't want land and territory. What do they want? Yeah, the trade routes. They want commerce because they're the ones that are making iron and different war materials. And so they want the trade routes open. They're not interested in their land. They don't want to manage more people. They don't want anything to do with these Jewish folks.
What tribe is David?
David is from Judah in the south.
Judah. Okay.
In the south, yeah. He's down in the south. The third thing, this is huge. The all-important priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, is in total shambles, right? I always thought everything was hunky-dory until the time of David and then Solomon, and then it all fell apart. I had no idea what a mess all this was, like before that. None of the priests that are mentioned are specifically called high priests, but a lot of them act like they're high priests. One of them is Eli. If you remember, Eli is the one that Samuel grew up with. Samuel is the prophet that anoints King David, right? All these names. Eli's sons were a disaster. Remember that? They were terrible. And he allowed them to start to act as priests. They were just terrible. They were just terribly selfish. It was awful. But not only was the priesthood messed up, but remember what's happened to the tabernacle. This is really important. We won't get to this today, I'm sure. Next week, this is huge. We're going to talk a lot about this. The tabernacle, remember, was that tent, right, that Moses had built way back probably 500 years previous, 4, 5, maybe even 600 years before this, depending, scholars argue the dates. But probably about some 500 years before David, Moses builds that traveling tent, that traveling temple, right? So 500 years later, what's the state of the tabernacle? It's a mess. It's shredding. It's falling apart. It's just falling apart. So it seems like they built some sort of structure to kind of keep it up in the city of, remember? Where was it? Shiloh. Yeah, Shiloh. But something happened at Shiloh. We're not really sure what it is. We talked about this at great length a couple weeks ago. We don't know exactly what happened, but somehow Shiloh was attacked. The tabernacle is totally destroyed. It's removed. And it appears only a few priests got out alive. We're going to see that probably next week. We're going to see that. So there's no tabernacle, as far as we know, that's in any kind of remaining standing quality at all. The Ark of the Covenant was luckily out of there, and it was sitting in a home in a town. And that's why the Ark didn't go back to the tabernacle, because there was no tabernacle. It's been destroyed at some point. So this whole religious life of the Jews is really messed up, because everything they're supposed to do is supposed to be in the tabernacle, right? Sacrifices and worship and their gathering time. Everything was supposed to happen in the tabernacle. It's gone. What are they doing? We're not 100% sure. It appears they just kind of set up shop in a couple towns, which again, we'll get to that next week for sure. The fourth thing that's super important today is that God has abandoned King Saul because Saul has abandoned God, right? Technically, Saul still is acting as the king, but spiritually, he is no longer the legitimate king of Israel.
But the people believe he is.
Yes, the people don't know yet, and we don't know how much exactly, like Jonathan knows. We're going to see this play out a little bit today. How much exactly did David even know? We're not 1,000% sure that they even really know what's going on yet until it kind of happens. But Saul knows somebody else has been anointed, because who told him that? Samuel the prophet said, hey, there's another guy that's anointed. Saul's not positive who it is, but he's getting a really good idea, right? By this point, he's getting a really good idea. What does Jonathan know? What does David know? We're going to see that play out today a little bit. So as we pick up, we're in chapter 19. Jonathan and David are going to be having a little conversation, and we're going to see the interesting play that's going to take place within Saul's family, with Jonathan and Michal, and then David now is the son-in-law too, right? So chapter 19, let's read verse 1 through 7. Saul doesn't really have the pulse of his people, does he? He thinks everyone likes him. He thinks everyone dislikes David, right? He's on the wrong side of everything with this. He thinks that they're going to choose his side over David so much. Jonathan, on one hand, says, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Well, we're going to read in a couple lines, he's going to say, oh no, he's not looking to do that. Far from that. So it's looking like Jonathan is just, he's not sure what to think about his dad. On one hand, it looks like he says, yeah, he's out to get you. And the next hand, he's going to say, no, he's not out to get you. So we're going to watch this kind of battle in Jonathan's mind with what's going on with his dad. What do you think's happening there? Okay, he's being played. And he doesn't want to believe his dad would do this, right? He just doesn't want to believe it. He loves his dad. And that's why here at the end, Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he's in his presence, just as before. Like, what kind of trust is that with David? Isn't that a little strange? But at the same time, because he trusts his dad, violent behavior and mental anguish of Saul, it's known by Jonathan, and it's known by his people. It's known by David. Yet, when you're in a dysfunctional, violent family, a lot of times people go back, right, over and over again, because you just don't want to believe your family is that messed up. And you want to give hope that something's going to change. And you want to believe that things are going to go right.
But doesn't David fall into that too?
Yeah, well, David goes back.
I mean, because
They want so badly. They're hoping for the best, right? They're hoping for the best. But what we're going to see is Saul. Well, Saul is an interesting character. He's so much fun to follow. It'd be fun to chart this whole character development with Saul. So Jonathan says in verse 5, "You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against the innocent blood by killing David without a cause?" Why would you kill David without a cause? If David is innocent and you kill him, Dad, you're going to bring judgment on the king, and you're going to bring judgment on the kingdom. In the Levitical law, in the law of Moses, there is no forgiveness, there is no atonement for cold-blooded murder. And Jonathan, I keep getting their names all mixed up. Jonathan is saying to his father, if you kill him, if you kill innocent blood without a cause, you're going to be sinning yourself, right? And there's not forgiveness for that kind of sin. And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. A little bit of logic and truth and reality is breaking into Saul's mind. So there's a little bit of goodness in there. He's able to hear this just a little bit. Right? If you look at the old law code back in Leviticus, we're not going to dive deep into that. We're not going to go there. But if you look into that, it's really weird when it talks about the forgiveness of sins with those sacrifices. It says if you inadvertently commit this sin, you perform this sacrifice. If you unknowingly commit this sin, you do this. Well, what about if you commit murder? What if you break the 10 Commandments? There is no forgiveness in the Old Covenant law. This is huge. There's no atonement for what we would call mortal sin. Except on the Day of Atonement, one day a year, there's kind of a blanket forgiveness of sin. But even within Judaism, they're unsure. The different rabbis are unsure. Do your, what we would call mortal sins, are the mortal sins really forgiven? So if you're Jewish and you enter into a sin like that, you're living in the state where you're not sure what your relationship is with the Lord. Thank God for the new covenant. Amen? Thank God for Jesus Christ. For the fact that we not only can go, if we screw up one time against a commandment, we can go 5 times a week, or as often as we need to, if you can find a priest that often, right? Thank God for the new covenant. So in this old covenant world, right, Jonathan is saying, look, Dad, this is horrible. If you have blood guilt, you may not be forgiven. And Saul listens. Saul actually, it's like reality breaks in for a brief moment. There's a little bit of sanity still inside of Saul. And we're going to see this again in a minute too. There's a little part of his heart that still wants to be receptive. A little part of his heart that's still open. And it seems good. Everything's good. Jonathan, it appears, has negotiated and arbitrated a little deal. And Saul says, okay, I can handle this. I'll calm down. David can come back. And everyone's like, oh, things are good again. It's not so dysfunctional after all. Right? How long does this last? Yep. Paragraph. Not very long at all. Notice what Saul does here too in verse 6. What does Saul do again in verse 6? He swears another oath. This man cannot keep his mouth closed. How many times has he sworn an oath? I swear an oath that nobody should eat. I swear an oath that whoever's guilty is going to die. I swear an oath that between Jonathan and I, one of us is going to die. I swear an oath that Jonathan's not going to die. He's swearing oaths left and right. And here again, he swears an oath. As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. David shall not die. Does Saul really believe that? Is he lying?
Could you put in today's term justification?
Justification? Is he lying, or is he, in the moment, does he really think that maybe I've changed? Maybe in the moment he believes maybe I've really changed. I don't know. I want to hope for him in that. You think you think it's legitimate in the moment? He seems to just be a guy in the moment, right? He really, very impulsive, goes with the wind, right? But whether he's lying or telling the truth, David trusts him and goes back into his house. Which one is crazier? I don't know. We'll see in a minute. So, yeah. The craziest one is Saul's wife, Ken says. Yeah, she's not mentioned a whole lot in this. So now Michal, who is David's wife, who is Saul's daughter, Michal comes back on the scene. We're going to read verse 8 through 17. We'll read that little section. Somebody read that, please. There's war again with the Philistines. And again, remember the Philistines are looking to expand, not expand their territory, but just their trade, right? So this part, I was almost going to go back and look at how many times it said there was war again with the Philistines, but I just gave up counting. It's happened so many times already. And there's a great slaughter among them, and David again wins, and they flee before him. You would think that he is constantly doing so well. You would think at some point King Saul would be happy about this. You would think at some point, I mean, he's winning in the name of the country. He's winning in the name of Saul, right? But he's not. David is undefeated. But no. Paranoia and jealousy is setting in, right? Evil is progressing. So an evil spirit, it flat out says, an evil spirit comes upon Saul. So he's sitting in the house right after he swore an oath that he would not do anything to David, right? He's sitting in the house, probably on his throne. Most kings would have a scepter. What does he have? A spear. So he's sitting there with his spear, like sharpening the blade is the image that I kind of have there. And David is playing music and he's staring at David. David's playing music, he's staring at David, sharpening the blade. Can't you just see that? And Saul sought to pin David to the wall. And David moves out of the way and spears the wall instead, and David flees. David escapes, probably saying, why in the world did I listen to Jonathan? Why in the world did I trust him? And go back. Very interesting in verse 11. That night Saul sent messengers. What do you think that word is in Hebrew? No, not assassins. The word is Malek. If you know Barry Malek and Lori Malek, their last name, Malek, means messenger or angel. The word in Hebrew is Malek, which means angel. That night, Saul sent, it could be messengers or angels. I just find that kind of interesting. Dark angels, obviously. But an angel is a messenger, right? So normally we would say probably a bodyguard, some sort of warrior, whatever. I just kind of like there's a spiritual connotation to that these guys are like dark angels sent out by Saul. I just find that kind of interesting. And these messengers are sent to David's house. Where's that? Where's David living? Yeah, we don't know for sure. Probably in Gibeah with Michal, which would be in Saul's own house, or at least one of the many houses that Saul owns at this point, right? So, because he's living with her. Michal, David's wife, tells him, if you don't save your own life tonight, tomorrow you're going to be killed. So she lets him down. What does this remind you of? She lets him down through the window and they flee and escape. Reminds you of Joshua. And who helped Joshua? Rahab, another woman. Remember when Joshua was, she lets him down out of the city and down a red cord or something, all that. I can't remember the whole story, but yeah, Rahab, another woman that's letting somebody escape in the name of the Lord. And it happens with Paul too. He's let down in a basket, right? So she lets him down, and then what is this thing about they took an image and laid it in the bed and put a wig on it and put clothes on? Like, what's the image?
Probably a statue?
Probably a statue of what?
Well, one of the gods. Or one
Yeah,
I don't know.
probably one of the false gods. Take a look at the text note. The term can refer to household idols. This one is given hair and clothes to make it look like David is lying sick in bed. Well, scholars have a heart attack over this line. They just, essay after essay after essay is written about this. We would blow by it and not even pay any attention, probably. Why do a lot of scholars have just incredible angst over this line? What do you think?
Why would David have an idol?
Yes. Why would David have a false god, an idol in his house? It wasn't his house. It was Michelle's house, which was Saul's house. Yeah, that's why I don't think that's that big of a deal, really. I don't get all worked up about it. But you should see the essays. Oh my gosh, whole books written,
So,
you know.
so you're saying that Saul believed in God.
Yeah, but he also...
Did he still adore?
Yeah, but Saul was also mixing his religious beliefs a whole lot. We're going to see a little bit more of that later today. We'll get to something that's going to... I think it's funny. I think it's making fun of the false god. It's saying the false god is so immobile, so unable to do anything. All it's going to do is lie there and look like a dead person, right? Look like a sick person. So there's this hilarious scene. The messengers come and they go, "Oh, David's sick." And Saul goes, "You know what? I don't believe it." What does Saul say? Bring the whole bed and everything. Bring him bring him to me, everything. But why doesn't Saul just go there? It's his daughter's house, right? Because he's king, he's prideful. And he wants other people to do the dirty work, right?
Or he's afraid.
Or maybe he's afraid. Maybe he's
David
afraid.
had the troops on his side.
Yeah. Well, not quite yet. It's almost there. David doesn't have well, maybe some with his battles, but so Saul says, "Bring him to me, the bed and everything." So when they find it, they uncover it. Here's this, wooden statue with a wig laying in the bed, and Saul says, "Why have you deceived me?" He has the guts to say that to his daughter. Does that just really infuriate you? He says to his daughter, "Why have you deceived me?" Who is the deceiver here? Right? David is going to escape. Michelle is on his side, right? She's helping him get away. And Saul is even more furious. He is getting more and more and more angry. So now David does something I've been wondering why he hasn't done before. He goes to get Samuel. It's like going back for Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? In Star Wars. He goes to Samuel and says, "Samuel, I need your help." Why hasn't he gone to Samuel? Samuel is very old at this point. Very, very, very old. In fact, he's so old he doesn't say a word in this next section. We have no idea what Samuel's reaction is to this. It doesn't tell us anything. So let's read. David flees. He goes to Samuel. And they're going to do something really funny. I love this scene. This is hilarious. Verse 18 through the rest of chapter 19. What is that? Well, yeah, so remember when this happened once before? In fact, I think it happened twice before. Saul comes upon the prophets that are prophesying. They pray with him. He goes into this utterance and ecstasy and trance, and he starts prophesying. And one time it was the musicians. So think of it as, it's the charismatic musicians that are hands in the air, praying in tongues, and they're worshiping, and they kind of get lost in the spirit, and it's that kind of a, this kind of overpowering nature of the Holy Spirit. And it's happened to Saul before. So he's open to this somehow, but his reaction is so strange and over the top. So David escapes. He goes to Samuel. Samuel's at Ramah, And it doesn't say that Samuel has any words. And this is where Psalm 59 that we just read comes in. When David has escaped, people are looking for him. He's running from the home. They're looking for him day and night, right? That's where that psalm fits in. He probably wrote this like the night that he's on his way to go see Samuel. Samuel doesn't say anything, but they go and they dwell in this little village that's outside of Ramah named Naioth. And Naioth seems to be the home of a lot of these prophets. So it's like this group of kind of like a charismatic group of Jewish folks that are praying. And when Saul sends his messengers there, the prophets pray over Saul's messengers, and they start joining the group, and they start praying in ecstasy. And so Saul sends another group, and they all join in. Now the charismatic group now has 20 more people. And then they send more people. Pretty soon, it's a whole, it's a blooming conference. And all these people are praying, and I just think that is hilariously funny. They're in some sort of ecstatic state, some kind of like a trance of prayer. They're just really caught up with the Spirit. So he finally goes himself. He goes, I don't know what's going on. He goes to Ramah, and they go, they're not here. They're over there in this other village in Naioth. So he goes there, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. I just find this hilarious. Very odd scene. Once again, Saul is overcome by the Lord. There's like an ecstasy. A little part of his heart, a little part of his will must have been open to the Lord. Right? A little part of him was still receptive. But then when he's in, like he always just takes it into a weird spot. He just goes way too far. What's happening with this? He strips off his clothes and lays naked. And that last quote was almost the exact same thing that was said back in chapter 10. Saul must also be among the prophets. Saul must be the leader of the prophets, they said another time. He must be one of them. So this quote is repeated. It was back in chapter 10 too. What's happening here?
Visually declaring he's not king.
This is going to happen again with David. We haven't gotten there yet, but there's a scene a little later. I think it's in 2 Samuel. David is before the Ark of the Covenant. He removes all his clothes, and he dances and sings and praises the Lord before the Ark of the Covenant, removing his kingly garments. Remember, there's going to be a lot of contrast and comparison throughout these stories, especially between Saul and David. So when Saul removes his kingly garments, what is that saying to everybody around? Yeah. Because the way that I would say it is that Saul, when he removes his garments before the Lord, he is saying, I'm not king. And he's not the king, right? He's not the king anymore. He's removing more out of unworthiness, maybe out of shame, out of a sense of sin. But when David removes his clothes before the Lord, he's still in control. It's like Saul has lost control of himself here. He's overcome with this. It seems like Saul has almost lost his will. Like he's almost like possessed in a strange way. Whereas when David does it, David is going to strip off his clothes, and that is more, I think, an act of humility on David's part. David's saying, I'm not the king, God is the real king. Saul is saying, unknowingly, he's not even aware of what he's doing, I'm not the king. And he's going to lay naked, which is in the Old Testament is a symbol of laying with sin. Right? There's like this sinfulness. Within Saul, he knows. Like Saul's heart, he knows that he's not right with the Lord. Right? But yet he's caught up in this like ecstatic worship thing. Whatever is going on here, he's totally caught up in it. And he prophesies as well. So it must be they're somehow speaking words of the Lord. They're somehow saying things. That's kind of what prophecy tends to be. And the people around are watching this, and you're like, that's a little odd. The king's like really into this. And then they say, Saul also must be among the prophets, which was the same thing that they said earlier. So I think this is it's really meant to catch us. When we get to David doing this kind of scene, we'll go back and look at this again. So you can kind of see the comparison among there. But the big thing I think that's happening is there still is a little bit in Saul's heart that still responds to the Lord. Maybe that's why the Lord has not removed him totally yet, because there's still hope for him. The reason he hasn't pushed Saul completely out of the way yet is because Saul still has a chance for redemption. Saul still has a chance to return to the Lord. Otherwise, the Lord would have just removed him. David would be king. It'd be all over. Why does the Lord allow Saul to stay? Maybe because there's still a chance. There's a little bit of openness in Saul's heart. Remember a couple paragraphs ago, he totally bought into what Jonathan was saying, right? Yeah, I do want to make peace. Yeah, I do want to do it. Then he can't do it. He can't do it. Yeah, I'm going to worship the Lord. I am going to give him a little bit. It's not going to last, though, right? Unfortunately, this ecstatic state of being in God's presence doesn't last with Saul. The prophets remain there in Naioth. Saul is not going to remain there. He's going to go back and grab his spear, right? So chapter 20. This is very interesting. This is a very long chapter, and this is really going to reveal a lot of what's going on inside Jonathan. And how much does Jonathan know? Does Jonathan know about David really being anointed king? Does he kind of vaguely have a little sense, but he's not sure? What is he thinking about his dad? This is the chapter that's going to really unravel this. This is a soap opera. This is where the relationships kind of play out, and it's really fun. So we're going to pick up chapter 20. We're going to read all the way from 1 to 17. He says to Jonathan, "What have I done? What's my guilt?" Like, he does not understand why Saul is after him. He doesn't get it. What is my sin before your father? Why does he seek my life? And remember, earlier Jonathan said in 19, Saul my father seeks to kill you. He said in chapter 19, verse 2. Well, here Jonathan says, far from it. He doesn't want to kill you. You're not going to die. My father has done nothing, either great or small, without telling me. If he wanted to kill you, he would have told me. It's not so. Right? Jonathan is so conflicted within himself.
Well, Jonathan
right?
is the one that brokered the deal.
Yeah. And also, to remember that these may have come down from two different sources, right? One of the sources may have Jonathan saying, "Oh yeah, I know." The other source may have said, "No, I don't believe it," and they've just been kind of edited together. That's a possibility too. But in the unified editing of it, it seems like Jonathan's a little conflicted. He's trying to piece this together. So here he's saying, "Far be it from me. It is not so." He doesn't want to kill you. David says, "Your father knows well that I found favor in your eyes." And he says, "Let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved." Like, Saul doesn't want his son Jonathan to be upset. He doesn't want Jonathan to be upset about this. Jonathan must be thinking, I just don't know what's up between my dad and David. Like, what is going on between them? He's really perplexed by this, it appears. Jonathan says, "Whatever you say, I will do for you, though. Whatever you say, I'm going to do." So David says, "Tomorrow at the new moon," we're going to talk about that in a minute, a new moon worship time, a sacrifice, "I'm not going to come to the table." So remember, at this point, David has been coming and dining with them. He's still been at the table with them, even after Saul is like chasing him down with spears. David is coming to the table with them. So he says, "I'm not going to come. And I'm not going to come for 3 days. By the third day, if your father says something good, or if father asks why I'm not there, And Jonathan's just going to say, well, he's run off to Bethlehem to be with his family for a sacrifice. If his dad says, oh, good, then it will be well. But if Saul is angry, if the king is angry about it, then I'll know that evil is determined. And you're going to know that evil is determined by him. So deal kindly with me, David is saying to Jonathan. Deal kindly with me, with your servant. For you have brought your servant, you've brought me into a sacred covenant with you. But if I am guilty, Jonathan, you kill me. Don't let your father. I want you to kill me if I'm guilty of anything. Right? That's how much they're trusting each other. If there's guilt, Jonathan says, verse 9, far be it from you, meaning no way. Take it far away from me. I don't want to hear this. No, I'm not going to kill you. No one's going to die. If I knew that it was determined by my father that evil would come upon you, wouldn't I tell you? Dad tells me everything. I would know. So David says to Jonathan, look, who will tell me if your father answers negatively? Who's going to come out and tell me? Who's going to be the messenger? And Jonathan says, he looks around and he goes, let's go way out in the field where no one can overhear us. I have a feeling there's spies around. Isn't that like an interesting just a little interesting thing? He says, come, let's go out in the field. Make sure that nobody overhears this. So they come out. Now Jonathan makes a vow with David, like his father has done over and over, but he's going to make a vow with God, with the God of Israel as my witness. When I have sounded my father about this tomorrow, or the third day, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not send and disclose it to you? If Dad's happy about it, he's like, oh, that's fine, I'll come and tell you. But should it not please my father, should my father be angry, and he wants to do you harm, the Lord will do so to me, to Jonathan, and more also if I don't disclose it to you. I will tell you, David, right? I will tell you if my father's out to get you. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. Really, that's as he was. He's talking past tense. If I am still alive, isn't that interesting? If I am still alive, Jonathan says, show me the loyal love of the Lord that I may not die, and do not cut off your loyalty from my house forever. What's he saying? He's saying to David, don't cut off the loyalty from my house.
And he wants his legacy to continue.
Yeah. Not only his legacy,
and his family tree to continue.
Not only his family tree and legacy, but what? He's heir to the throne. So it seems like, because of the way he's saying this, he's saying, David, if you survive this, and if I get in trouble, right? You, David, don't cut your loyalty from my house. If you are going to be the king, don't destroy my family line. Promise me that my family will still live, right? The loyalty from my house.
Because that's the normal course of doing war.
Right.
Once you
What would they do?
Conquer a thing, you kill all the
previous,
whole line,
right?
so there's nothing to challenge.
So it seems at this point, at least, Jonathan has put together, oh, David is the one that's going to be king. So even if we're not positive what he knew before, but by this point it sounds like he's saying, you're going to be king. Don't destroy my line. Don't destroy my family. Because that would be the normal thing that you do. The next king comes up and kills all of the family members of the previous king. So it appears that Jonathan is starting to put some stuff together. And he's saying, look, I don't think Dad is out to kill you. But if you really insist, you really think he is, don't come to this dinner, and by the third night, whatever Dad says, we're going to know by his reaction what his feeling is towards you. And I will tell you, David, I will tell you what that reaction is. But whatever's going on here, promise me that you're going to keep you're going to keep my family alive. Whatever goes on. And it looks like he's aware that he could die too. All of this is going to take place around this third day of the evening of this new moon meal. Now here's something kind of interesting. The new moon is the first day of the month. So Jews they follow a lunar calendar, right? They follow the moon cycles. And the new moon is the first time, so it's after when there's no moon at all, and that very first night there's the slightest sliver of a crescent, that's starting the new moon in the new month, right? The Jews would have a feast on that new moon day every month, the beginning of every month, but it wasn't a feast like a party at the palace. According to, Numbers chapter 10 and Numbers 28, all it is some sacrifices that take place in the temple. There's some sacrifices that take place in the temple. Look at what Saul has done. He's taken a feast that's supposed to be sacrifices in the temple, and he's making it into a 3-day dinner with the king, right? He's adding things once again to the religious rites of Israel. You get that? He's adding things. He's drawing this out. He's making it a multi-day feast. And it seems to involve the king, not the priests. There's no mention of the priests offering a sacrifice. He's just talking about they're going to have all this food. There's going to be this big meal, this big celebration. And it goes on now for 3 days instead of 1. Saul is once again doing something that looks kind of pious and religious on the outside. And he's just like adding to it. What he's probably doing is he's mixing in some of the moon cults, some of the worshipers that worship the moon gods from the other religions around, and they would do 3-day feasts at the beginning of every moon in the same kind of way. So Saul, again, he's like kind of half in with the Lord, kind of half making up his own thing, like we've seen before. Huh? Do we get that? Okay, so are we following so far this kind of dialogue with David and Jonathan? Jonathan's still not so sure what's up with his dad. We're going to test and see. David's pretty convinced dad is out to kill him. So let's see how this plays out. Verse 18 to, let's go 18 to 29. Just to make sure that we get this. So Jonathan says, okay, this is what we're going to do, so that you know what the response is, whether or not it's safe to come back or not. I'm going to go out, and you're going to hide behind a pile of rocks. I'm going to go out and pretend I'm going to be shooting some bows and arrows, pretending I'm going for a mark. If I go off to one side, and I tell the kid that's with me, because I'm not going to go chase my own arrows. I'm going to have somebody with me. I'm the prince, right? So I'm going to shoot off to the side, and also I will go off to the side and get the arrows. That means things are good. If I shoot way beyond the mark, and I say, oh, it's way beyond, things are not good. Okay? That's going to be your sign, so that you'll know what the response of the king is. And so, and he says, I want you to look at in verse 23, and as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, of the matter of their friendship, the matter of he's making a promise. They're making a promise to each other, and Jonathan is promising David, and he's asking David to promise that he's not going to kill Jonathan and his family. Of that matter which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. That doesn't mean between like blocking them, but between as in uniting them. Right? Do you get that? Bonding them. The Lord is connecting us. Don't look at that as saying that he's dividing them anyway. He's between them in that way. When the arrows go beyond you, and you sent your way, and as for the matter which I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between us. So David hid himself in the field, and the king is sitting at his seat by the wall. Jonathan, so at the meal, the king is sitting by the seat by the wall, so that means his back is against the wall, right? Because he doesn't want to have his back towards the door because he doesn't trust anyone. Jonathan sits opposite. Abner, the military guard, is sitting there at Saul's side. David's place is empty. Saul didn't say anything the first day, and he's thinking, maybe something has befallen David. Maybe he's not clean. Yeah, that's it. Surely he's not clean. Why is that a strange thing for Saul to think? What is Jewish cleanliness usually associated with? Okay.
Having relations.
Where does it matter?
If there's blood on somebody's hands, they can't associate with other people.
Okay.
And if people out killing people, there's going to be blood on his hands.
Where does it matter if you're clean or unclean? What? Yeah, when you're going to the temple for sacrifice. It doesn't matter sitting at a table whether you're ritually clean. Ritually clean has to do with the temple. And again, Saul is mixing the idea that being clean at the temple, that's got nothing to do with whether or not you're clean at the king's table, right? They're not offering a sacrifice. So again, Saul's like, it's like he had the worst CCD teacher ever, right? Like he had the worst religious education teacher in the history of the world. He doesn't even know what any of this means. That cleanliness doesn't matter sitting at a table with other Jews. It would matter if you were with Gentiles and all that kind of thing. But the only way it matters is because then you're not able to go in the temple, though. It's not about sitting down at the table with the king. Saul is thinking, well, maybe he's just not clean. Why not? Why is the son of Jesse, he finally asked, why hasn't the son of Jesse come? Jonathan just explains, well, they're having their feast day with their family. Remember back in the very beginning with Eli and Samuel's parents did that. Samuel's parents had gone back for a special feast day to their hometown. So David earnestly asked me to go. Let me go because our family's having this sacrifice. For this reason, he has not come to the king's table. So starting in verse 30, Saul's anger was kindled against David. Okay. Against Jonathan, sorry. Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. And he said, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. That's what we say nowadays, right?
Yes.
So verse 30, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. What the heck is he saying? This is a very Jewish kind of insult. Shame on your mother's private parts. Which means what? Shame on your birth. Shame on you. You should have never been born. Like, this is his father telling him this. Calling his own son, you son of a perverse woman. Right? So he's basically saying, you've disgraced your own birth. You've disgraced your own mother. Why in the world would he get so angry just because Jonathan says, David's off at a family party? Yeah, because David's doing his own thing. He's not honoring Saul. And Saul probably knows this maybe isn't true. He is so angry at Jonathan. And verse 31 says everything. You cannot be the king if he is. You dummy, do you not understand this? As long as the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom, Jonathan, will be established. So Saul clearly, at this point, we know Saul sees David is the next in line for the throne. Maybe he didn't know for sure before. Now he's put it together. Because this is the line where we know Saul knows what's going on. Don't you see, Jonathan? As long as David is alive, you can't be king. So verse 31 is the turning point. Because don't you know, you silly boy, that you could be king if David is dead? And he says in verse 32, Jonathan answers Saul, why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul cast his spear at him to strike him, his own son Jonathan. So Jonathan knew that his father, at this point, this is when he knew his father was determined to put David to death. Now Jonathan gets it. No doubt about it anymore. After being called these horrible names and having a spear thrust at him, Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger. It's like, oh no, now I see what David was getting at. My old man is insane. Remember, just earlier in this very chapter, he goes, oh no, it's not so. It's not so. Dad's not trying to kill you, right? So this is the chapter where everything kind of gets revealed. They see really what's going on. Their eyes are open. Jonathan leaves the table in a fierce anger. He ate no food that second day of the month, and he was grieved for David. So in the morning, verse 35, he goes out and he shoots the arrows like he promised. And obviously Saul had a pretty negative reaction. So is he going to shoot off to the left, to the side, or is he going to shoot way beyond? He's going to shoot way beyond. So let's read that last little part here. Verse 35. Perfect setup for next week. Verse 35 through the rest of chapter 20. David's not just afraid of losing his life. He's not just afraid of losing his friendship with Jonathan. He is like saying, what in the world is the Lord doing? I thought I was the king. What is happening? He's done all this battle. He's done everything right. And now he's being pursued. And I cannot imagine what's going on in David's heart. Well, we can imagine because he writes it in the Psalms. Next week, we're going to look at Psalm 56 when we start off, which is a psalm when David flees to the town of Gath. And it tells us that in the psalm. So we do know what's going on in his heart because he writes about it. It's so wonderful that we have these. David is confused. If I was anointed, he must think, if I was anointed for some huge role here, why is this turning out this way? Why doesn't he go back to Samuel and talk to Samuel? I've got to think because Samuel's just so old. Maybe he can't hear anymore. Maybe Samuel's not making any sense when he talks. It seems like he would go back to Samuel. Instead, David is going to do something very intriguing. Chapter 21 is really cool, and it unpacks something that happened a little bit earlier. He goes to Nob, and this is the scene where he goes and he eats the holy bread that's in the temple. Well, it was supposed to be in the temple. There's no temple, right? It's supposed to be in the tabernacle. Oh, whoops. There's no tabernacle. So somehow in Nob, it's almost like they've set up kind of like a temple, kind of like a tabernacle of some sort. We're not really sure. The scholars aren't really sure, like, what exactly is going on here? Because as far as we know, the tabernacle's been destroyed. But Nob seems to be the place where some of those priests from Shiloh seem to have escaped to. And it seems to be the place where they're at least doing some of the sacrifices. And what's very interesting, Nob is about 2.5 steps out the front door of Jerusalem. Interesting stuff today. This is like unpacking. It's a lot of character stuff. Next week, though, really intriguing. Amen? Are we good? We're excited? Huh? Happy? Good stuff, mostly? Great stuff. Great conversation. Thank you, everybody. So we'll just close in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, we just thank you for all of your wonderful blessings, and we ask for you to be with everybody who is gathered here. Let the word really speak into our lives. and let us take this out into the world so that we
Thanks
too
for
can be
joining
like
us in the
David
Catholic
and people
Community
after
Scripture
your own
Study
heart.
as we walk
People
through
say,
1st and 2nd
Amen.
Samuel.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week. You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us in the Catholic Community Scripture Study as we walk through 1st and 2nd Samuel.